Hello everybody, it's Riff Raff Hornhelm, and I'm back again with another presentation from the Dwarven Vault. And today we have a fail tale for you. And today's fail tale is once again kind of a poke at some of the problems that the original basic or 1E game had. And in this particular case, we're going to be talking about 1E and things that were either heavily modified by the DMs and parties or players, and were also frequently just tossed aside. And I'm going to talk about one very specific thing, which to me at least was probably the single biggest failure of the original Dungeons and Dragons, advanced Dungeons and Dragons, what's referred to today as 1E. And very simply, that's psionics. And I understand it was a good intent to add to the game. Unfortunately, I disagree completely. During the release of Psionics, I played that fairly regularly, off and on, during that time, both again as a player and as a dungeon master, primarily as a dungeon master. And the biggest thing that bothered me about it is that it was like having two sets of magic. And it also gave you something that would give a magical effect, essentially. However you want to look at psionics, the results are as if somebody were to have used magic. And I didn't find it to be a addition to the game. It was an extra step, an extra confusion for the players. It really didn't add any value to the game. For all the extensive rules and tables that they included for psionics and explanations, and of course they expounded upon it in the Dragon and so forth and so on. To me, it would have been much simpler to say that's something for another game, rather than trying to integrate that into Dungeons and Dragons. In the end, the various influences that were on the creators and early contributors to the game, the psionics idea was a good idea that just shouldn't have been included. It made the game more difficult. It was something that was not beloved by most of my players, and it wasn't beloved by most players themselves. And the DMs that I was speaking to on the subject felt that for the amount of time it required to add psionics to the game as a regular ongoing thing, it wasn't really worth it. It was an additional confusion that wasn't needed for anybody in the process. However you want to look at it, the concept of psionics didn't add significant value to the game from either a dungeon master standpoint or a player standpoint in most cases. It ended up being shoved aside because it was just another thing to keep track of. And of course, if you look at psionics in 1E, the requirements for being able to use psionics were very, very stringent. And it generally meant that there was a limited number of people in the party, a couple, that might be able to do psionics. If you put them up against any kind of significant creature that had that ability, could use psionics as an ability, generally it meant that attacks were falling on people who had no psionic defenses anyways. That's not very much fun for the players who weren't able to indulge in that side of it. And of course it made it way too easy in encounters for a psionic creature to do significant harm to the party. Like anything else, if you're playing this game, Dungeons and Dragons, the idea is for everybody to have fun. When something impacts the game and prevents you from having fun, or prevents the majority from having fun, then it's not worth it within the game. And that's what we found with psionics. every time we tried to use it, it left us feeling very unsatisfied, whether we were players or dungeon masters. And it was something that we pretty quickly cut, certainly from our major campaign. And in new dungeons, when we try it, it didn't last for very long. It just wasn't very satisfying, and I think was the worst overall addition to the game when they released the game, in terms of 1E, when the books came out. And of course, the Dungeon Master's Guide was the last one to come out in the process, so some of the psionic things were things you picked up from the dragon or from other players. The consistency was bad, and well, the whole layout of the Dungeon Master's Guide, the original 1E Dungeon Master's Guide, is, well, horrible would be an understatement. It's been so long since I've tried to use psionics as was described in 1E. I'm at a loss for words. It became something that we really didn't like, and I'm not sorry that we dropped that part of it from the game. I've always said, and have said this to the people responsible for this originally, that what the hell were you guys thinking? This didn't add any value to the game. It contributed to a few difficult discussions, but I wouldn't, that's a hill I would die on. I don't think psionics added anything appreciable to the game. If you wanted to create a game that had psionics instead of magic, where magic was much, much more rare and maybe only in items, and the only way you could do spells was mentally or something, I don't know. I've been fishing for words here to really try and nail down the most specific reasons for why psionics wasn't a good addition to the game, and the bottom line is it made it more complex with little return value, and it isolated it amongst too few characters who would have that ability in a overall adventuring party to make it something that would be fun and engaging for the adventuring party. And as such, it ended up having to go away. We weren't going to use that anymore. I have not used the psionically attacking creatures from the monster manual in ages now. Not that there are many, but still, there's no point. Psionics needed to go. So, to me, that's overall the biggest fail from the 1E release of Dungeons & Dragons was the whole psionics thing. I hope you found that interesting. If you did, consider leaving us a like, drop us a comment, consider subscribing. But most of all, come back and see us again. Thank you, everyone, for your support, and remember, dwarves rock!